They were inches away from ending a war. Inches. That's the exact phrase Iran's own foreign minister used. Not miles, not continents apart. Inches. And then nothing. The talks collapsed. The bombs stayed ready. The oil kept not flowing. And somewhere in the wreckage of those failed negotiations, there exists a document that most Americans have never heard of. A 14-point peace proposal from Tehran that Washington quietly buried. What was in it? Why did America say no? And could those 14 demands actually be the most important political document of 2026? Stick around, because what you're about to hear is not the version the mainstream media gave you. Let's start with the scene. April 2026. Islamabad, Pakistan. One of the most expensive hotel conference rooms in South Asia has been transformed into a war room. American negotiators, 300 of them, are on one side. Iranian officials are on the other. Pakistani mediators are running back and forth like they're trying to defuse a bomb with a kitchen timer. And outside, oil prices are sitting at $126 a barrel. The global economy is grinding. Shipping lanes that carry a fifth of the world's energy are basically dead. And every hour these two sides spend arguing in Islamabad is another hour the world gets a little more economically unstable. That's the room. Now let's zoom out and understand how the world ended up here. To understand the 14 demands, you have to understand what happened on February 28, 2026. That was the day the United States and Israel launched a surprise military strike against Iran. And I want to be very precise about the word surprise here, because this attack happened while US and Iranian diplomats were still actively negotiating a nuclear deal, while people were still talking, while channels were still open. The bombs fell anyway. Within minutes, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was dead. Multiple senior Iranian military commanders were dead, and Iran's entire nuclear and missile infrastructure was under assault from American and Israeli air power. Now here's the thing Washington calculated. The theory, the actual strategic logic, was that the Iranian regime was so weakened after years of crippling sanctions, after the protests that had shaken its streets, after losing several of its regional proxy networks during the Israel-Hamas war, that a decapitation strike would cause the whole system to collapse from the inside. The assumption was, take out the head, and the body falls. It was clean, it was surgical, and it was catastrophically wrong, because Iran didn't collapse. Within hours, a new supreme leader was named. Within days, Iran launched what military analysts would later describe as one of the most complex retaliatory drone and missile campaigns in the history of modern warfare. Waves of missiles hit American bases across the region. Arab states that had nothing to do with the strikes found their oil facilities under attack. And then Iran did something that truly changed the entire global equation. It shut the Strait of Hormuz, not partially, not symbolically. It effectively closed the world's most important oil choke point. And suddenly, the smartest military strategist in Washington had a problem that bombs couldn't solve. We'll come back to what that closure meant economically in a moment, because the numbers are genuinely terrifying. But first, let's talk about who stepped into this chaos, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Of all the countries in the world, France, Germany, China, the United Nations, the country that ended up brokering the first ceasefire between the United States and Iran was Pakistan. Pakistan, a country that, just 12 months earlier, had been fighting its own brief but intense war with India. A country that many analysts had written off as economically unstable and diplomatically irrelevant. And yet, on April 8, 2026, it was Pakistan's army chief, now elevated to Field Marshal Asim Munir, who got Washington and Tehran to agree to a 2-week ceasefire. Not the UN, not China, Pakistan. And then Pakistan hosted the peace talks in Islamabad, and that ceasefire, which was supposed to last 2 weeks, became the shaky, constantly violated, repeatedly extended framework that is still technically holding today. So why Pakistan? Geography, intelligence networks, a complex, deeply personal history with both sides, and frankly, a military-led government that could move fast and speak plainly without the weight of democratic bureaucracy slowing it down. Pakistan was useful, and it knew it. But those Islamabad talks in April, they failed. And the reason they failed is the document I want to talk to you about now. On April 28, 2026, Iran's negotiating team submitted what they called a comprehensive peace counterproposal. 14 points. A complete roadmap, not just for ending the fighting, but for fundamentally restructuring America's relationship with Iran and the broader Middle East. Washington received it, read it, and rejected it. Trump called it totally unacceptable. End of statement. No further details. So most Americans never found out what was actually in it. But here's what was in it. And as I walk you through each demand, I want you to think about something. Because there's a question at the end of this list that I think changes how you see this entire conflict. Ready? Let's go through it. Demand number 1. A permanent end to all hostilities within 30 days. Not a ceasefire. Not a pause. A permanent, binding end to the war. Within 1 month. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. But here's the catch. Iran wanted this locked in before any nuclear discussions began. America wanted the nuclear question solved first. So right out of the gate, before you even get to the controversial stuff, there's a fundamental disagreement about the sequence of the deal. Who goes first? Who blinks first? And in geopolitics, that question is never just procedural. It's existential. Demand number 2. Complete U.S. withdrawal from military positions near Iran's borders. Think about what that means on a map. American forces are positioned in Iraq, in the Gulf, in bases across the Arabian Peninsula. Iran is essentially surrounded by American military infrastructure. This demand wasn't about removing one base. It was about reshaping the entire military geography of the Middle East. Washington's response? Silence. Demand number 3. Immediate lifting of the U.S. naval blockade. Now this is where the economic stakes come back into the picture. And they are enormous. Because after the ceasefire, the U.S. didn't just stop bombing Iran. It imposed a naval counter-blockade, cutting off all ship traffic to Iranian ports. Tehran called this an act of economic warfare. Iran threatened military action if it wasn't lifted. And here's the irony. The same blockade that was meant to pressure Iran into negotiations was actually making those negotiations impossible. You can't demand someone talk to you while your hand is on their throat. Demand number 4. The release of frozen Iranian assets. For years, decades really, billions of dollars of Iranian funds have been frozen in banks around the world. Sanctions, litigation, seized accounts. Iran wanted all of it back as a precondition for broader talks. America said no. Demand number 5, and this is the one that barely got any mainstream coverage, war reparations. Iran formally demanded that the United States pay compensation for the damage caused by the February strikes, the destroyed military infrastructure, the civilian casualties, the economic losses, the cost of a war that Iran argues it did not start. And that was launched while diplomacy was still active. The United States, predictably, did not engage with this demand at all. Now pay close attention to what's happening here. Because this is where the surface-level story, Iran wants stuff, America says no, starts revealing something much deeper. Every one of these first 5 demands, taken individually, sounds like Iran being difficult. But taken together, they form a picture of a country that feels it has been systematically cornered, economically, militarily, diplomatically, and is now using a negotiation table to try to undo 25 years of American pressure all at once. This isn't just a peace proposal. This is Iran's attempt to restructure its entire relationship with American power. And that's not a negotiation America was prepared to have. But we're not done with the list. Because the next 9 demands are where it gets even more complicated. Demand number 6, a new internationally monitored mechanism governing navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Not just reopening the strait. Iran wants a new legal framework that gives it a formal, recognized role in controlling who passes through. Think about that. The world's most critical oil choke point, with a new set of rules that legitimize Iranian authority over it. For the United States, whose entire naval strategy in the Gulf depends on freedom of navigation, this was essentially Iran saying, "You don't own the sea anymore. We want a seat at the table." Demand number 7, a formal written security guarantee from Washington, a commitment that the United States would never again launch military action against Iran without UN Security Council authorization. In plain language, Iran wanted America to legally bind itself from ever striking Iran unilaterally again. Given that America literally just did exactly that, launched a unilateral strike while negotiations were ongoing, you can understand why Tehran considered this non-negotiable. You can also understand why Washington considered it unthinkable. Demand number 8, international reconstruction assistance. Iran's infrastructure took enormous damage: ports, military facilities, energy production sites across the country. Iran wanted a formal international reconstruction fund, similar to what was offered to post-war Iraq and Afghanistan, to rebuild what the strikes destroyed. This demand quietly acknowledged the scale of the damage, while simultaneously framing the conflict as an illegal war of aggression that entitled Iran to rebuilding support. Demand number 9, recognition of Iran's right to civilian nuclear enrichment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And here, we finally arrive at the nuclear question, the issue that allegedly started this whole crisis. Iran's position is simple, and it's legally grounded. The NPT explicitly recognizes the right of signatory states to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. Iran signed the NPT. Israel, America's partner in these strikes, never has. So Iran is being asked to give up rights that are codified in international law by a country that doesn't even acknowledge those laws apply to it. Tehran's foreign ministry put it bluntly: this is absolutely not a topic we negotiate or compromise on. Full stop. And here's the brutal paradox hiding at the center of this entire conflict. The original justification for the February strikes was Iran's nuclear program. America and Israel said Tehran was dangerously close to a nuclear weapon, so they struck. Except the strikes destroyed Iran's military infrastructure, killed its supreme leader, destabilized its government, and closed the world's most important oil corridor. And the nuclear question? It's still unresolved. In fact, Iran has now explicitly said that nuclear negotiations won't happen until after a permanent ceasefire is in place. Which means the one thing this war was supposedly fought over is now the last item on a very long list, buried beneath reparations and blockade removals and security guarantees and reconstruction funds. The war that started because of the nuclear program may end without ever actually solving the nuclear program. If you want to understand the real power games shaping the world without the boring mainstream news filters, make sure you subscribe. We cover these stories the way they deserve to be covered, with depth, honesty, and zero corporate spin. The remaining demands cover a web of interconnected strategic questions. Iran called for the normalization of its diplomatic relationships with all Gulf states, recognizing that years of proxy warfare had left Tehran isolated in its own neighborhood. It demanded the removal of Iran-related sanctions that had been layered on by every U.S. administration since 1979, sanctions so complex that even American lawyers struggled to fully catalog them. It called for a formal international conference on Middle Eastern security architecture, essentially asking the world to sit down and redesign the geopolitical rules of the region from scratch. It demanded that Israel be required to participate in any nuclear framework discussions, a politically explosive demand given that Israel has never acknowledged its own nuclear arsenal. And finally, it proposed a new bilateral economic cooperation framework. The idea that once the war ends, there should be a structured path toward actual trade, actual investment, actual normalization between two countries that have been enemies for nearly 50 years. 14 demands, some reasonable, some ambitious, some politically impossible in Washington. And taken together, a complete, coherent vision for what Iran wants the post-war Middle East to look like. A Middle East where Iran is not surrounded, not sanctioned, not bombed. A Middle East where Tehran has legal rights, economic dignity, and a formal seat at the table of global power. Now here's the question I promised you earlier, the one that changes how you see this. Why did America say no? The easy answer is, these demands are too radical, too much, too fast, too humiliating for a superpower to accept. And that's true. But it's not the whole truth. The harder truth is this: Accepting even parts of Iran's framework would require America to publicly admit several things it has never admitted. It would require acknowledging that the February strikes happened during active diplomacy, which is dangerously close to admitting a war crime under international law. It would require engaging with the reparations question, which opens a legal and financial conversation America cannot afford to have publicly. It would require constraining American military freedom of action in the Gulf, the one region where U.S. naval dominance has been the bedrock of global energy security for 50 years, and it would require forcing Israel into a nuclear accountability framework it has spent decades avoiding. These aren't just inconvenient demands. They are structural challenges to the American-led Middle Eastern order that has existed since 1973. And right now, with oil at $126 a barrel, with shipping traffic through Hormuz at 5% of normal, with Russia quietly selling replacement energy to China at premium prices, with Pakistan emerging as a more influential regional power than India, that order is already fracturing, whether America accepts Iran's demands or not. Because while Washington and Tehran are locked in this exhausting, expensive standoff, the rest of the world isn't waiting. Russia has already told China it can replace every drop of Iranian oil that the war is blocking. That is not an offer of friendship. That is Russia embedding itself deeper into China's energy dependency, a dependency Beijing is going to find very difficult to escape from. China, meanwhile, is watching carefully. Every day the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively closed is another day Beijing draws closer to the conclusion that relying on Middle Eastern energy, transported through waters America controls, is a strategic vulnerability it must eliminate. That means accelerating pipelines, accelerating its domestic renewable transition, and accelerating whatever it needs to do to ensure that the next time America uses a choke point as a weapon, China has an escape route. And India? India, which has been trying to position itself as the indispensable swing state of the 21st century, the country that works with everyone, aligns with no one. India is paying $120 a barrel for oil and watching Pakistan get all the diplomatic glory. Modi's government quietly tilted toward the U.S.-Israeli side of this conflict, apparently calculating that alignment with Washington was the safer bet. But alignment didn't come with a discount on energy prices. And it didn't come with a diplomatic prize. India's sophisticated foreign policy apparatus watched Pakistan, its longtime rival, its neighbor, a country it just fought a brief missile war with, become the indispensable broker between the world's two most powerful militaries. That's not just ironic. For India, that's a strategic humiliation. As of today, a fragile ceasefire technically holds. Trump announced something he called a Memorandum of Understanding, a framework for peace that, by his own description, still needs to be finalized. The nuclear question is not in it. The reparations question is not in it. The Strait of Hormuz governance question remains unresolved. Iran has said its right to enrichment is non-negotiable. America has deployed additional Marines and airborne units to the region while simultaneously claiming the diplomatic process is ongoing. Pakistan's foreign ministry is described by reporters as scrambling, which is not the word you want associated with the people trying to prevent a second round of strikes. Iran submitted a 14-point peace plan. America called it totally unacceptable. And now both sides are watching each other across a diplomatic no man's land, while the global economy absorbs the consequences of a war that never really ended, and a peace that never really began. Here's the thing about Iran's 14 demands that nobody wants to say out loud in Washington. Even if America rejects every single one of them, and it might, those demands now exist. They have been formally submitted. They have been reported. They sit in diplomatic archives, and the world has read them. Which means the narrative is now permanently complicated. It is no longer simply Iran refuses to give up its nukes. It is Iran proposed a comprehensive peace framework and America walked away. That distinction matters. Not in Washington maybe, but in Beijing, in Delhi, in Ankara and Riyadh and Jakarta, in every capital that is quietly recalibrating its relationship with American power. Because here's what those 14 demands actually represent, underneath the legal language and the diplomatic framing. They represent a country that has been sanctioned, isolated, attacked, and told it doesn't deserve to exist as a sovereign state, using the only real leverage it has left to demand to be treated like a human civilization. And the world is watching to see whether America is capable of answering that demand with something other than bombs. What happens if the ceasefire collapses? What happens if Trump decides the diplomacy has failed and authorizes a second wave of strikes? The Iranian regime has already survived one decapitation attempt. It has already proven it can absorb military punishment and keep functioning. A second round of strikes would not produce a different result, and every serious defense analyst in Washington knows it. But it would produce something else. It would permanently close the door on any negotiated settlement. It would lock the Strait of Hormuz for months, maybe years. It would send oil toward $200 a barrel. It would hand Russia and China a geopolitical gift so large that the strategic balance in the Pacific, the real arena that American policymakers lie awake worrying about, could shift in ways that cannot be reversed. And here's the thought I want to leave you with. The document sitting on that Islamabad table, the 14 demands America refused to accept, may look from Washington's perspective like an Iranian wish list. Too ambitious, too humiliating, too much to give a country that just fired missiles at American bases. But from Tehran's perspective, from the perspective of a country that was attacked during diplomacy, those 14 demands are not a wish list. They are the minimum conditions for survival in a world where the most powerful military on earth has already demonstrated it will strike first and negotiate later. Iran is not asking for luxury. Iran is asking, what does it take to not be bombed again? And the terrifying part, the part that should keep you up at night, is that America hasn't answered that question. Not really. Not yet. The MOU is vague. The nuclear issue is deferred. The blockade continues. The Marines are deploying. And in the background, 14 demands sit unanswered in a diplomatic archive in Islamabad, waiting for either a real answer or the next explosion. Because one of those two things is coming. The only question is which one arrives first.